Welcome back to Manhwa Unlocked. Hit that subscribe button and let's unlock another world.
Lucifella was a powerful witch known as the Calamity of the Continent. She was followed by 6 others. This witch wielded limitless fire magic, comparable only to the lava of hell itself. In addition to that, she also possessed ice magic. From early childhood, she was a cruel witch. At the age of 15, she destroyed an empire that dared to oppose her. Because of her, a war began, and disaster took root in her heart. She was an archwitch who knew no bounds and kept expanding the number of her followers. At the sight of them, people would say that a demon had descended upon the world. As a result, humanity was on the verge of extinction. But one day, a hero appeared, someone destined to save mankind. That hero was none other than the Holy Father of Asperia. He became the light of hope for humanity's salvation. Soon, a great war broke out between the Holy Asperia and the forces of darkness. This clash of 2 powers lasted for 5 long years. After the death of Witch Lucifella, the darkness finally agreed to a peace treaty. The war ended in peace after 50 years of terrible battles. Sometime later, Archbishop Bachman sat in his study, writing a chronicle about this man. While he was doing so, there was a knock on the door and someone entered. It was his subordinate who reported that the Holy Father was calling for them. The man immediately understood with sorrow what had happened and said that the time had finally come. All this took place in Holy Asperia. The Holy Father was on his deathbed, praying to the goddess Asperia with his hand raised toward the heavens. Everyone in the room was deeply saddened, knowing that his end was near. Raising his hand, the Holy Father declared that the goddess had not abandoned them and added that her incarnation would soon appear again. His final words were a cry, that they must urgently find the Holy Chetai. After saying this, he fell silent, and everyone understood that the Holy Father had passed away. Thus, the hero of the continent, the Holy Father of Asperia, departed from the mortal world, leaving behind his final command. Afterward, the people began to discuss how to fulfill his last wish. They feared what might happen if the nations or disasters learned of the Holy Father's death. Therefore, they decided to delay the announcement of his passing until the child was found. However, one man spoke up, saying that even though the Holy Father had commanded them to find the child, they had no clue where to begin the search. Hearing this, everyone around fell into despair, realizing the truth of his words. At that moment, as they stood in sorrow, it began to rain. Lord Bachman's subordinate told him she would fetch an umbrella. The man thought to himself that even the heavens were sharing their pain, shedding tears upon the earth. He stood there, simply enjoying the rain. But suddenly, a cry came from a nearby bush. Bachman immediately turned toward the sound, wondering if it might be the cry of a child. Curious, he considered whether this could be the very child mentioned in the prophecy. Driven by this thought, he ran toward the place where the cry came from. When he arrived, he saw a brilliant light shining in one spot. Moments later, the holy light began to fade, revealing the small figure of a child. Seeing what had happened, the man wept and whispered that this was truly a creation of God. Thus, the prophecy of the Holy Father had indeed come true. Bachman approached the child, knelt beside her, and said that she was the Holy One. With tears in his eyes, he added that they had been waiting for her arrival for so long. But the moment the little girl saw the man before her, she became furious. She thought that he was the one who had abandoned her and angrily kicked him in the face. The title Holy One could only belong to the incarnation of the goddess herself. Holding a position even higher than that of the Holy Father, the goddess's incarnation was destined to save the continent. Because of that, the people believed they had nothing to fear. Not even the witch, for the goddess would protect them. Yet they still dreaded the return of Lucifella. The moment the heroine appeared in this world, she immediately wondered what on earth was going on. The incarnation of the holy goddess Asperia had sent them this holy child, thus the prophecy was once again fulfilled. Only a divine messenger could possess violet eyes and hair identical to that of the goddess. A woman joyfully proclaimed that their Holy One was truly blessed by the goddess. But one of the priests objected, saying that the blessing would be granted to everyone on the continent and even beyond it. They all stood before the heroine, expressing gratitude for her visit. From that moment, everyone called her only the Holy One. The little girl sat before them with an angry expression, thinking that something was terribly wrong. It was wrong because the heroine remembered her true name, Lucifella. She recalled the many lives she had lived before, from a princess of a distant kingdom to a powerless slave. Sometimes she had even been a bird or a cat. She had been born into the bodies of countless creatures, even a fish at times. Eventually, she grew tired of the endless cycle of life and death. In her previous life, she had sought to destroy the world itself, to end this dreadful loop once and for all. And now, the heroine sat in horror, realizing that she had been reborn into the body of a girl called the Holy One. She suddenly screamed, releasing a burst of divine light, wondering why, after more than 100 life cycles, she had been reborn like this. Bachman smiled gently and remarked on how bright the light was, saying that such brilliance could only belong to the Holy One. Meanwhile, the heroine thought bitterly that she was, in fact, an atheist. The girl was especially irritated by the man before her. She could never forget him, no matter how much time passed. She was thinking of the night she had fought during the battle with the saints, the man once called the Holy Shield. And now she wondered when he had grown so old. The heroine questioned herself. It couldn't be possible. She was curious how much time had passed since her reincarnation. Her thoughts turned to her former companions. How had the war ended and what had become of them? Sadness filled her heart as she realized she knew none of the answers. Suddenly, she felt a woman lift her up and place her onto a soft pillow. The heroine looked closely at the woman and wondered what was happening and why she had been laid down like that. Then the woman told the baby that they would now prepare a new diaper for her. Shocked, the heroine thought, "What did she just say?" But the woman calmly continued, saying she would take care of it immediately. The heroine struggled and cried, trying to break free. She wanted to see if this woman truly knew who she was. She desperately wanted to be released. This was, after all, a complete violation of human rights. She began to cry bitterly, then thought to herself that once she regained her powers, she would kill everyone here without hesitation. Sometime later, the woman watching over the girl said that the child had drunk her milk and was now asleep. Looking at her, she added that the baby must be very tired. Then, she gently placed the girl into her crib, remarking that since no one else yet knew about the birth of the Holy One, it was best to keep it that way for now. Bachman noted that they must protect this child, for the forces of darkness were still alive. And speaking of them, they were not entirely without reason. But suddenly, a red-haired man interrupted, telling the old priest to simply do his duty. Then he asked, otherwise, what was the point of their gathering here? It was decided that they would protect the Holy One, and no one would dare to lay a finger on her. The man was about to continue speaking when he heard the door open behind him. Turning around, he remarked that the newcomer had arrived just in time. It was a boy, and the man proudly announced that this was his son, George IV. Not only intelligent, but also gifted, the boy carried the bloodline of the Paladins. Another woman stated that this child would serve as the Holy One's escort. Bachman commented that the boy looked so young. A moment later, his father told the boy to introduce himself, but George merely avoided responding and said nothing. The Paladin laughed, explaining that his son was simply not very talkative. The boy, meanwhile, thought to himself that his father was a liar. After all, he was here only because of his father's orders. Though tasked with protecting the Holy One, he found the mission completely uninteresting. George frowned as he looked at the girl, realizing she was just a baby. He wondered why he, of all people, had to take care of something like this. His father told him to simply watch over her. The boy thought that once he grew up, he would take charge of his own life, and when that time came, he would cut all ties with his family. Meanwhile, in another place, the forces of darkness were conversing among themselves. They discussed how, just as the prophecy had foretold, it seemed the Holy One had indeed returned. Suddenly, a woman remarked that she had been hoping that old fool would finally disappear into his grave. Her companion asked what she meant by that, reminding her that a planted seed eventually grows into a tree. Therefore, it was better to cut it down before it became a problem. But the woman countered that the Holy Father had died, and because of his prophecy, the Holy One was born. Suddenly, she heard someone laughing. She turned toward the source, a man glowing faintly by the window, and asked Jack whether he was laughing at her. The man told her to think about it for a moment. They all seemed so gloomy about the future, but weren't they strong enough to handle it themselves? After all, their queen was no longer with them either. Suddenly, an argument broke out between them, and they began to release their power. The woman asked why he had brought her up now. Then a man sitting in an armchair interrupted, ordering them to stop this nonsense. He reminded them that their duty was to guard this place in case the queen ever returned. But he could not understand what the point of their squabbling was. After that, the man ordered Jack to go and eliminate the so-called Holy One. The young man agreed, saying he had been wanting to do that anyway. Since everyone seemed to consider her so important, he said he would take care of it quietly. Then he turned around, saying he was leaving. Before departing, he added one last thing. They had better take care of the queen. Meanwhile, the heroine slept peacefully, dreaming of her past life. In her dream, an old man stood before her, saying that she was an orphan and that despite all the days that had passed, she hadn't made any progress. He asked if she still wanted him to teach her magic. The girl sitting before him answered that she truly did. The old man then asked why she wanted to learn magic. The girl replied that she had a wish, though, and she wanted to make it come true. After that, he asked for her name. The heroine said she didn't have one yet. The old man smiled and said, "Then from this day forward, your name shall be Lucifella. It means light." Suddenly, the heroine awoke with tears in her eyes, realizing she had once again dreamed of her teacher. Back then, she hadn't learned to control her magic properly right away. But thanks to her mentor, the one who taught her magic and gave her the name Lucifella, she became the Archmage of Runabout. Her teacher had cared for her as if she were his own child. He was the one who had shown her what happiness truly was, and yet he was also the one who destroyed that happiness. The man who had made her what she became. Lying in bed, the heroine thought she had almost forgotten that she'd been reborn, trapped now in a child's body. Still, she couldn't erase her memories of her past life. She also couldn't forget what she had sought in her former life in Asperia. She had to find that hidden treasure buried in this place. The heroine thought that even if she had to crawl in this tiny body, she would start searching. Then she decided that beginning tomorrow, she would explore every corner of the palace. The next day, people throughout the city began discussing a certain man. Someone said that the Holy One had been sent to protect them from all calamities. York walked through the crowd and overheard an interesting conversation. Someone asked if the speaker meant the messenger from Runabout. The man replied, "Of course. That guy's nothing but a pervert. Impossible to understand." From early morning, the man was chopping wood bare-chested and shamelessly flirting with the maids who brought him food. The women whispered that now they had to confess to the goddess every night, for if they didn't, something terrible might happen. Watching him, they wondered if he truly could be the Holy One's messenger. One of the girls exclaimed that it was simply impossible. Anyone could see that man was a shameless pervert, not a divine envoy. George overheard the whole exchange when suddenly his father called out to him. The boy turned and told his father to come with him. After the Holy One's appearance, the death of the Holy Father was officially announced. He had once been Asperia's greatest hero. Many envoys had arrived on the continent to offer their condolences. Among them was the so-called Envoy of Calamity from Runabout. George imagined what he might look like and thought the man sounded rather peculiar. At that moment, George and his father arrived at a large door. The boy noticed his father stopped in front of it and wondered why he didn't enter. When George spoke up, he suddenly saw that the man was crying. The paladin, with tears in his eyes, said that it seemed the goddess had not yet abandoned them. Ever since their ancestors had betrayed the saints, he thought they would never be able to erase the mark of a traitor. The man placed his hand on his son's shoulder and said that the goddess had given them a second chance. He asked the boy not to let them fall into disgrace before the goddess again. George agreed, but thought he had no words left to say. After all that, they finally opened the door and entered the room. There stood the heroine's crib, but to their shock, it was completely empty. Stunned by what they saw, the man immediately asked where she could have gone. He rushed to the crib, while George glanced to the side and saw the baby saint crawling away somewhere. At that moment, the heroine thought that her escape had gone quite well. She realized that the handle was high up, so she had to reach the door quickly and wait a little. She needed to hurry if she wanted to find the hidden treasure. Suddenly, she heard George shouting that the baby was over there, and he ran toward her. The little girl looked at him, thinking, "Isn't that the boy who was standing by the door? I thought he hadn't even noticed me." The boy ran up to her and grabbed her by the clothes, calling her a little brat. That instantly angered the heroine. At that moment, she turned toward him and swung her tiny fist, thinking, "Does he really believe he caught me?" Her punch was surprisingly strong. The boy fell flat on the floor. The heroine sat on top of him and thought that her fist hadn't lost its strength yet. Then she turned in the direction she originally wanted to go, determined to escape and never return. Meanwhile, George began to come to his senses and shouted that she mustn't go that way. He smiled sweetly at the little one and asked her to come back to him. The heroine turned her head toward him as he gently coaxed her to crawl back, but the girl only smiled and wondered what could be so interesting about him, then dashed away in the opposite direction, leaving the boy completely flustered. While doing so, she thought, "Does he really think I'm a child who listens to anyone? That's his mistake." Lost in thought, she didn't notice the path ahead, and a moment later she was falling down the stairs. Only then did she realize what the boy had meant earlier. There really was a staircase there. She screamed, thinking that she was probably going to die again, but George was already sprinting toward her to save her. At that moment, others entered the room and were shocked by what was happening. George leapt forward, trying to catch the baby in his arms. The people gasped and shouted the saint's name, but the boy managed to catch her just in time, preventing her from hitting the ground. When the heroine realized she was still alive, she thought that one more second, and she would have ended her 100th life. Moments later, the people said the boy should be restrained. The heroine was confused. What were they talking about? The guards immediately approached and started tying the boy up with ropes. He tried to explain that he had actually saved her. The heroine herself thought they had completely misunderstood everything. A woman holding the baby examined her and said she only had a few scrapes on her knees. The heroine thought that the boy had actually suffered much more. At that very moment, George's father entered the room. He heard people saying that the boy had injured their precious saint. Someone even claimed to have seen him coming down the stairs. Looking at his son, the man said that it was a mortal sin and begged to be punished in his place. But they told him that was impossible. The boy would have to face judgment. The heroine watched in confusion, wondering what was happening. Even if she tried to speak, they wouldn't understand her anyway. That meant the boy was probably doomed. Suddenly, a young man stepped forward from the crowd and said that as someone who had witnessed everything from the start, he asked if they would allow him to speak. The heroine thought his voice sounded familiar. People began whispering, wondering what he was doing there. The man said there must have been a misunderstanding. Hearing his voice and seeing him, the heroine realized that no matter how many times she was reborn, she could never fail to recognize this man. She knew him very well. He was the Mage of Lust, one of the 7 calamities. His name was Jack Casanova from Runabout. The heroine wondered what he was doing here. Jack continued speaking, saying that the boy hadn't pushed the child. It was quite the opposite. He had saved the baby from falling down the stairs. He even got himself hurt in the process, but thanks to that, he saved her life. The woman holding the baby said they couldn't simply allow that and thought that although the saint was unharmed, this man was still meddling in their affairs. Jack approached the boy and asked what they had decided about him. Then he added that if they were going to kill the boy anyway, could they at least hand him over to him? George immediately asked what on earth he was talking about. Everyone around, the guards and the child's father, was shocked. The girl holding the heroine asked why they would even do such a thing. But the heroine, in turn, examined the boy and wondered what benefit he could gain from such a deal. At that very moment, she recalled her past life. Jack had been sitting beside her, saying that nothing could stand in the way of love. Then he asked how about that strategy, making everyone prisoners of love and popcorn to enslave them that way. After that, he declared that he wanted to be the main character and invite all the saints to his side. Apparently, everyone in the room would surely love that idea. The heroine then thought that Jack Casanova had always been like this, full of family love, romantic love, and even that first sincere love. As a symbol of the sin of his era, Jack truly loved pulling such tricks. Because of that, he could literally make anyone fall for him. But suddenly, the boy said that if they really intended to kill him, wouldn't it be better to hand him over to himself? The people talking to him wanted to say that such a boy simply couldn't do that. At that very moment, Jack used his magic of love and cast his charm on everyone around. As a result, the people became enchanted by his beauty and stared at him in admiration. The heroine quickly covered her nose to avoid being affected by his magic and wondered how long he planned to keep spreading his pheromones here. Then the girl noticed that everyone had already gathered around Jack. It turned out that all attention was focused on him as he stood in the center. Moreover, he still hadn't even recognized her. The boy then thought, could all the saints really be enchanted by pheromones? Then he looked at the girl and wondered if she might actually be a saint herself. He even dreamed that everyone could live surrounded by love. At that very moment, the heroine thought about how to divert everyone's attention away from the boy. Then she realized that she had no choice but to attract attention to herself. As a result, the little girl suddenly began to cry loudly. The woman holding her said the child was really crying and asked if she was uncomfortable in her arms. So the woman set the heroine down on the ground. Jack looked closely at the girl and wondered if she truly wanted to approach him. The heroine focused her power and immediately stood up. Everyone was shocked. No one expected such a small child to rise to her feet. Someone even asked if she was really walking. The little girl confidently began to walk toward the boy. Jack crouched down in her path and said it seemed this young lady wanted to meet him. But she calmly walked right past him, leaving the boy in shock. That was because the girl wasn't heading toward him, but toward George, who sat tied up. The boy had tears in his eyes and asked what the little one was doing. Looking at him, the girl thought that she would help this boy who had blocked her way. Just this once. Then she lay down on his knees to rest peacefully. Everyone nearby was shocked. Someone exclaimed that the child had approached him herself and lay down like that. This was truly the first time something like that had ever happened. Jack stood there, not understanding what had just occurred. The heroine kept lying there, thinking that she was really very tired. From the crowd, someone said it seemed the girl really liked the boy if she lay down on him like that. Jack thought that the incarnation of the goddess was clearly showing that this boy was a good person. Because of that, his punishment would have to be canceled. Then he realized what he had to do and smiled sweetly, looking at the heroine and the boy. The girl noticed his strange gaze and wondered what he was planning. Although George had been accused of disobedience, all his sins were forgiven when the saint lay down on his knees. As a result, in the name of his father, George III, George IV was appointed as the saint's knight. Sometime after these events, the little girl was put to bed. The woman who tucked her in wished her sweet dreams and quietly left the room. The heroine, however, wasn't actually asleep. She was only pretending. Then she opened her eyes and began to climb down from her bed, thinking that everything was quiet and everyone must have gone to sleep. After that, she took a small stool and started dragging it toward the door, realizing from Jack's expression earlier that he had probably recognized her. That's why she wanted to meet him. But this time, she couldn't afford to be caught like before. Since everyone was asleep, this was her best chance. Slowly, she climbed onto the stool and tried to reach the door handle. But the moment she stretched her hand out, she saw the door open in the opposite direction. She froze, unable to understand why the door had suddenly opened on its own. That's why she began to wonder if this was really how her 101st life would end. A moment later, the girl found herself in the arms of the boy who had just entered through that very door. The man holding her asked what kind of disobedient child she was. Then he added that, of course, he could never fail to recognize his queen. The little girl thought that meant he really did recognize her. A moment later, she tried to greet Jack, but couldn't, since she still didn't know how to speak. She also thought that finally he had come to her himself. The boy placed her on the soft cushion and stood beside her. The heroine felt sad, thinking how frustrating it was that she still couldn't speak properly. Jack looked at the heroine's grumpy face and said her habits were still the same. She, in turn, grew angry and tried to ask Jack why he was there. Then she tried to say that it wasn't what she meant, but still couldn't form any words. That made her even angrier, and the boy noticed it. He used his magic, and the heroine suddenly shouted that this could really drive someone crazy. Then she realized she had spoken normally. At that moment, her companion said he had lent her some of his spirit power. He added that manipulating spiritual power was his specialty. Then he asked whether the girl wasn't happy to see him standing before her now. The heroine angrily told the boy that his way of speaking hadn't changed at all. He replied that her rough tone hadn't changed either. Then the heroine thought she never expected him to find her, though it wasn't a bad chance. After all, she had wanted to use magic in this new body. The saddest part was that even in this body, she could only emit divine magic. Jack noted that it must be quite difficult for her to live like this. The heroine then asked Jack why he was here and wondered if Rom had sent him. The boy said that was almost the case, but he had actually come to take revenge on his enemies. The heroine looked at him in surprise and asked if that meant she was his enemy now. Her companion asked whether she really remembered nothing. The heroine told him not to think for a second that she had forgotten all her past lives. It's just that every time she could never remember her death. It felt as if those memories had been deliberately erased from her mind. She also recalled hearing a voice begging her not to destroy this world. All the deaths she couldn't remember. It was all very strange. She wondered why she had suddenly reincarnated into this holy body. She was truly curious about what had happened before her rebirth. Her companion suddenly burst into tears and cried out after hearing that. With tears in his eyes, he asked if she really couldn't remember anything. The heroine told him not to cry and simply explain everything. Tears wouldn't help anyway. The boy raised his head and said that if she wanted to know what had happened, he would tell her. It turned out that on the last night before the battle at Holy Asperia, someone had poisoned her. On that final night before departing for Holy Asperia, Lucifella gathered together with the 7 sins, and they raised their glasses in a toast to victory. Then the girl stood up and said that just yesterday they had all knelt before her begging for forgiveness. But now, everyone gathered here was truly invincible. That's why this time, they would once again leave with victory. All this Lucifella said in her status as Archmage. Then she exclaimed that the treasure hidden in the city would soon fall into the hands of their mages. After that, she raised her glass high and shouted that once this was done, victory would already be in their grasp. That was the heroine's very last memory. At least after her death, her followers fulfilled her will. The heroine turned to Jack and asked where her followers were now. He looked up and said that without their queen, only 6 remained. About 50 years after the queen's death, they began to convince themselves that they had failed to protect her and had lost their chance. Sometime after their queen's death, they gathered in the hall to discuss something. A piece of paper lay in the center. Someone wondered if it was a peace treaty with the saint and what nonsense that could be. They argued that in this situation, they should continue the war. But another reminded them that they no longer had a queen. Someone stated the obvious, that the saints must have been behind it. Another asked why then the saints hadn't attacked them immediately after the queen's death. Suddenly, a man said that during their last celebration with the queen, there had been only 6 members present. Everyone in the room, eyes full of tears, immediately noticed the absence of the 7th member. They asked who had killed the queen. The man replied, asking if they truly didn't suspect him. One of the group members fell into despair, dropped to one knee by the wall, grabbed his head, and screamed that it was all his fault. He couldn't protect his own queen. Suddenly, another person turned to someone else and said he looked suspicious too. The accused man asked angrily if he was really trying to accuse him right now and slammed his fist on the table. Then the man declared that the queen would return soon. Until then, they must protect Runabout, the kingdom of their queen. This was said by the Sin of Wrath, whose name was Crom. He continued that until her return, they must fulfill their duties and protect the queen's body. For as long as she is gone, they cannot trust one another. He hoped the throne would not remain empty for long, but for now, the Queen of Runabout was gone. After that, Crom announced that only those truly loyal to the queen should remain. In the end, 2 of them left together. A girl who stayed behind said she'd heard that Nate, the first to leave, had gone missing. Crom replied that he understood. He then looked at the 2 remaining people and admitted he hadn't expected them to stay. Beatrice was the sin of envy. She said that when the queen returned, she would immediately see who had been most loyal to her, so one day, Beatrice would have a throne beside the queen. There was also Jack, the sin of lust. With a smile, he said the queen would definitely return. Then he turned to Crom and asked if he wouldn't get bored waiting for her alone. They both added that they would stay with him until the very end. The man looked at them closely, then gazed into the distance and said it was truly wonderful. Jack continued telling the heroine's story. He said that after a long time he pretended to befriend the saint, though old grudges still lingered. Later he learned that a new saint had appeared and immediately came here to kill her. Then he smiled and said that he'd found out this saint was their very own Lufafella. He suggested that it was time for them to simply go home. The heroine thought that if she hid herself using Jack's spiritual power, escaping this room would be easy. Still, doubts tormented her, and she remembered her former teacher. The little girl suddenly said that it was impossible. They couldn't return now. The man, surprised, asked what she meant and why they couldn't go back. He wondered if it was because of the forbidden magic she had failed to master in her past life. The girl paused for a moment and then said that perhaps being reborn in the saint's body was her chance to find that very treasure. It turned out that in her previous life, she had desperately wanted to find it. She remembered that it was her teacher who had created that forbidden magic. Jack immediately exclaimed that they had to return to Runabout. After all, she might find it if they gathered everyone again and started a new battle with Asperia. He added that the throne of Runabout, even after all this time, still remained empty. Not only the throne remains empty, but so do they all. The vacant royal seat wounds them deeply from within. Then the man knelt down and gently took the little girl's small hand in his own. He said they had believed, waited, and at last their prayers had been answered. He also asked the heroine to think things over just a little longer. Hearing his words, the heroine fell into thought. She realized that everyone was probably waiting for her, or rather, for Jack's convenience. Still, at such a time, she needed to think more rationally. That's why she asked her companion if he understood that their enemies were not as simple as they appeared. She didn't want meaningless sacrifices, and the reason she sought forbidden magic concerned only her. The girl still couldn't fully understand what was happening, especially after being reborn into a child's body. Everything had changed. She didn't even know who was responsible for her death, and acting rashly would be too dangerous. Yet by becoming a saint, she now had the best chance to find the forbidden magic she had longed for in her previous life. The man sat across from her, listening carefully. After a deep sigh, he said it seemed she would not change her mind. Still, he admitted that in the saint's body, she would be safer here. The heroine asked if he truly agreed with her. Jack replied that he would, of course, like to take her with him, but he didn't want to experience her wrath later. At that moment, he gently lifted the heroine into his arms. Then he placed her in a crib and his spirits tucked her under a blanket. Jack said that until she turned 5, he would not spread any rumors about her in Runabout and would leave her here. He also warned her to be cautious until then. If the Saints discovered who she really was, they would never let her go. And if that happened, Chrome would become so furious that he'd blow the very soul out of all of Asperia. The next day, the weather was beautiful. The heroine sat in the arms of a woman who remarked that their saint seemed to be in a bad mood today. Another woman nearby asked if she hadn't slept well the previous night. The heroine thought it was all because of her intense meeting with Jack. It seemed too much time had passed since her death. She reflected that she would age like any other saint. But Jack, who had already lived for more than 50 years, recognized her instantly and hadn't changed at all. She suspected that the other members of their group hadn't changed either. The girl was terrified that if Crom found out she was here, he would be enraged. She imagined him rushing to Asperia, shouting how they dared to take one of their own. And if they refused to return her, he would immediately start a war. She thought that with such fury, the cities would be reduced to ash and stone. The girl found it humiliating to die right before the battle and wondered if Chrome might be angry with her. After Jack's talk with the heroine, he immediately returned to Runabout. With a smile on his face, he entered the mansion where they lived and announced his return. His sudden arrival startled Beatrice, who was sorting through papers. She looked up at him and asked what he had been doing all this time. He casually replied that he hadn't done anything special. He had simply met someone he loved. He said that although she was just a tiny sprout now, he was curious to see how beautiful she would become when she grew up. Beatrice was shocked by his words and asked if he was talking about the saint child. Then she exclaimed that he clearly couldn't be trusted with anything. Jack glanced at an empty chair and asked where Chrome was. The girl replied that if he meant Chrome, he had recently left with a bouquet of flowers, probably to visit the queen. Indeed, the man was sitting there, lifting the flowers he had brought with him. Then he carefully looked at the former body of the heroine, which lay beneath a glass shell. After a moment, he quietly asked when Lucifella would finally return. The heroine was lying in her crib, dreaming again about her past life. In front of her stood a man, and she even asked whether this boy had been sent by the Holy Father to destroy them. At that time, Crom, who was beside her, said that this man's name was George II. People called him the strongest paladin in all of Asperia. George looked closely at the girl and asked if she was truly the archwitch known as Lucifella. Then his expression suddenly changed, and he confessed that he loved Lucifella. He begged her to make him her slave. The heroine and her subordinate were both shocked by such a sudden turn of events. Chrome became furious, drew his sword, and declared that the man was asking for death. The girl stopped him, telling him to calm down and not do anything rash. At that moment, the heroine woke up because she felt like sneezing. She was still lying in her crib, thinking that the memory had sent chills down her spine. Suddenly, she noticed someone approaching her and asking softly if the saint was feeling cold. It was George III. His presence startled her, for he looked exactly like his father, whom she had just seen in her dream. The man lifted the girl into his arms and said he would fetch a warm blanket for her, so she should wait a little. The heroine began crying and tried to push him away. Surprised, he asked why she disliked being near him. His son suggested that perhaps he had approached too suddenly and scared her. At that moment, the heroine thought how unbelievable it was that she had met a descendant of the sin of sloth. It turned out that the father and grandfather of these men, George II, had once been responsible for the sin of sloth. He had been a paladin of the temple who betrayed the saints and joined Lucifella. Now, before the heroine stood the 3rd and 4th generations of that lineage. She thought how strange it was that his nephew looked exactly like him, and how fortunate it was that the child of the 4th generation had escaped that fate. Looking again at the man holding her, she realized he wasn't just slightly similar. He was an exact copy of George II. Suddenly, a woman entered the room and asked whether the saint had been waiting long. The heroine turned toward her and saw Maria, who said she had brought a warm blanket. The heroine was overjoyed and immediately reached out to be held by her. She thought she had longed for Maria's warm embrace and gentle voice. Even though she herself could do nothing now, this woman was her only breath of life. A little later, a young man entered the room and asked Maria if the saint was with her. She turned to him and asked what had happened. The man replied that Lord Bachman had requested an audience. Maria, surprised, asked if it was truly Lord Bachman and not the Archbishop. As she walked down the hall, Maria thought that it really must be him. It seemed that this man was soon to become the new Holy Father. Bachman, who had the honor of finding the saint, would soon ascend as the Holy Father, the highest rank of the church, a man who would never bow his head before any priest. After some time, he finally approached him and bowed. The archbishop returned the bow and said he was very glad to see the saint. The woman, however, thought that no matter how high he rose, he could never compare to the goddess. The old man took the girl in his arms and asked the others if they could leave them alone for a while. Maria asked what he wanted. The others noted that he simply needed to tell the girl something, so it shouldn't take long. The main heroine looked at him in surprise, wondering what was going on. She was curious. Was he really planning to talk to a child who couldn't even understand anything? A moment later, doubts tormented her. Could he have guessed who she really was? At that moment, the archbishop brought the girl to a certain spot and said that 500 years ago, the first Holy Father who built this temple left behind an image of the goddess. Now the heroine and Bachman were looking at that very image of the holy goddess. Then the man said that this was the last prophecy sent to them by the goddess. The heroine looked at the man again in surprise, wondering how that could be the last one. The man replied that no one had ever received anything like it since. The little girl was deeply shocked. She had not expected to hear that. She immediately thought that if this were true, then all the prophecies passed down by the previous Holy Father were lies. The heroine couldn't understand. Did that mean the Holy Father had been a fraud? That the holiness of the Asperia temple had deceived them for nearly 500 years? The archbishop continued his speech. He said that the goddess had not abandoned them after all, for they had been granted a second revelation. The girl wondered what that revelation could be. The old man explained that it referred to the birth of the saint. Then they both looked at another statue, and Bachman said that the Holy Father had foretold the saint's birth. The heroine looked at the statue and realized it indeed depicted the previous Holy Father. The girl knew she had only unpleasant memories connected with him, and she found that an ironic twist. The man continued speaking, examining scrolls inscribed with sacred knowledge. The old man said that these truths had been passed down from one Holy Father to another through chronicles like these. This time, the responsibility had fallen to him. The last oracle left by the goddess 500 years ago was a prophecy about the end of the council. It turned out that in the past, the main goal of Asperia's archwitch Lucifella had been to obtain forbidden magic powerful enough to destroy an entire world. But even after her death, her remaining followers hadn't given up their attempts. Bachman then said that the girl's arrival, without exaggeration, had become their last hope that the goddess had not yet abandoned them. The heroine thought to herself that she certainly didn't share that belief. Her interlocutor again emphasized that the girl was their final hope. The heroine thought to herself that she neither believed nor hoped for that, because in truth, it would only bring calamity that would destroy this world. The girl thought anxiously that everything seemed far too easy. These priests truly believed she was their savior, sent by the goddess. Yet they didn't even consider the possibility that the goddess might not exist at all. In her mind, the heroine noted that whatever this goddess had planned, it must have been a terrible mistake. After these thoughts, the girl turned to Bachman. Her speech was still poor, but a few words were understandable. The next thing she said was that she wanted to see the forbidden magic. She looked at her companion's face and was slightly horrified. At that moment, she recalled Jack's warning, to be careful, because if the priests learned who she really was, they would never let her go. The old man's expression was indeed strangely mysterious. The heroine wondered about his reaction. Could he have realized who she truly was? But a moment later, she decided that was impossible. After all, this man surely wasn't sharp enough to figure that out. Yet doubt crept back in. What if he really had recognized in her the very same Lucifella? At that moment, Bachman suddenly ran out of the room with incredible speed. Then he shouted that it looked like the saint had done some business. Hearing those words and his cry, she was completely shocked. That very second, Maria ran in and said she'd bring a new diaper. The woman also noted that the saint looked very pale right now. The old man, meanwhile, stood there confused, wondering where to put the girl down. The heroine thought to herself how clueless they could be. The archbishop ran off to the side and muttered that they couldn't just leave her like that. They needed to quickly make a place to lay her down. The girl thought these people were truly strange. The old man approached a nearby column, grabbed it, and began to use his holy power, thinking that surely it wasn't his job to change a baby's diaper. Watching him, the girl thought that at least she'd get to see forbidden magic. But then the man unleashed his immense holy power and effortlessly tore the column out of place. After that, Bachman smiled and laid her down on the ground. The heroine was stunned and thought maybe it was time to retreat. At that moment, Maria spoke to her, saying she had inspected the stone cradle and could now easily change the diaper. The heroine thought that such muscles wouldn't scare her one bit. She also decided that once she grew old enough to speak clearly, she'd definitely ask this man again about the forbidden magic. And so, 5 whole years passed. Bachman had already become the Holy Father and was helping a young man. The young man thanked him, saying it was surprising that such an important person would carry heavy things himself. But the Holy Father replied that there was no need to thank him. He said he was simply doing what he wanted to do. Then smiling, he added that he truly enjoyed it and was glad he could help. Meanwhile, some girls nearby were watching the Holy Father and whispering among themselves. One of them asked if he had always had such thick hair. Another asked if she didn't know that Lord Bachman's hair became that way after receiving someone's blessing. The first woman asked what blessing she was talking about. Did she mean holy water? The other smiled and said that the person who blessed him was right there. At that very moment, the main heroine appeared on the horizon, running toward Bachman and calling out to him. Seeing her, the Holy Father's face lit up with joy. He immediately knelt down, ready to lift the girl into his arms. But things didn't go quite as expected. As she ran up to him, the heroine suddenly jumped and tried to kick him. The old man calmly raised his arms and blocked the little girl's attack with ease. Smiling, he said that she had graced an old man like him with her presence, and that made him a very happy person. The heroine retorted that this was exactly why she didn't visit, because Bachman should have come to her instead. Suddenly, someone nearby asked where the saint had gone. Hearing this, the girl immediately turned and ran off, saying she'd be going then. The person beside the Holy Father commented that the saint was as lively as ever today. So, several years had passed since the heroine was reborn in the saint's body. By now, she was already 5 years old. Having learned to speak, she finally tried to carry out her plan. Many times she came to the old man and said she wanted to see inaccessible magic. When that didn't work, she asked to see the forbidden magic. But when that failed too, she came again and asked when he would finally tell her about it. Each time she received the same answer. The old man said that once she grew a little older, he would definitely tell her about that magic. The heroine didn't argue, but thought to herself that he clearly wasn't planning to tell her anything until she reached adulthood. And if that really was the case, then she'd simply take matters into her own hands. Sometime later, Maria was looking for the heroine, asking everyone where the saint had gone. She said it was almost lunchtime and couldn't understand where the girl had disappeared to. The girl, meanwhile, was hiding and didn't want to be seen. She thought to herself that she was no longer at the age where all she could do was cry. But that wasn't all. The heroine had also learned to connect with the divine power that resided within her. Though she wasn't thrilled that the first use of her power had been to cure Bachman's pathological hair loss, the heroine thought that today she had to finally uncover the truth. But suddenly, someone shouted that they had finally found where the saint was hiding. The girl immediately lifted her gaze and saw a mysterious stranger standing before her. She instantly sensed an energy coming from him, one she had felt before. The man drew a knife from his inner pocket and declared that, in the name of Runabout, the girl must die. But defeating her was not so easy. She instantly leapt up and counterattacked the man who had tried to kill her. The heroine then asked what exactly he had just said. The stranger, startled, wondered what kind of child possessed such immense power. He immediately remembered Chrome's words, the one who had sent him on this mission. Chrome had warned him never to let his guard down or treat her lightly just because she was a child. After all, no one before had managed to kill her. The man realized that he had underestimated her because she looked like a child. But now he was curious. Could she really be something other than human? While the stranger was lost in thought, the heroine spoke to him, telling the old man to look at her and open his eyes. At that moment, she stood on top of him, pressing her foot against his chest. She said that if he was so determined to die, then first he should satisfy her curiosity. The man, shocked, wondered if she really thought he'd just hand over all the information she wanted. Then he began rummaging through his pockets, trying to find something. But when he couldn't, his eyes widened. His poison vial for suicide was gone. The heroine noticed his hesitation and immediately held up a small vial of liquid, asking if this was what he was looking for. The stranger was stunned. The girl had stolen it right off him without him even noticing. She casually crushed the vial, destroying the poison, and said that no matter how dangerous things got, it was no reason to give up and die. Then she told him that now he'd definitely have to answer her questions. Sometime later, the heroine had finished dealing with the mysterious man. She thought to herself that he, too, turned out to be an empty shell. Then she picked up the attacker's knife and looked at her reflection in the blade. She recalled Jack's words, that over time, more and more assassins would come for her. She wondered if the fact they came so recklessly meant they had no idea who she really was. The heroine understood that there was nothing strange about people coming after her, but none of them even dared to open their mouths. She had a plan for dealing with assassins. First, eliminate all the evidence. The next step was to calmly erase their memories. Still, she thought it was unfair. Not only did she get no useful information, but she also had to clean up after them. She had only wanted to ask how her comrades were doing. But since they were all essentially immortal beings, she had little reason to worry about them dying of old age. Suddenly, a young man appeared and said he had finally found the saint. The girl looked at him and recognized him as George IV, the one who had come to find her. The man said that he and Maria had been searching for her for quite some time. The heroine immediately pointed at the unconscious stranger and said that this man had suddenly fainted. At the same time, she thought that once again she had been caught red-handed today. After some time, the girl was lying in her bed. Maria was sitting beside her, saying what could have happened to that man if his unconscious body hadn't been found. It turned out the girl had discovered another body today. With a smile on her face, the heroine replied that it was nothing special. She had simply done what she was supposed to. At that moment, the girl thought it was actually a good thing that these devout people had such poor observation skills. She also reflected that because of George IV, she couldn't properly use her magic. If he learned about the killers, he would definitely tighten security. After a while, Maria wished the saint sweet dreams and gently patted her head. The girl thought to herself that, strangely enough, she actually liked this kind of atmosphere. When the woman saw that the little girl was about to fall asleep, she quietly left the room and closed the door behind her. Then she headed to the place where she had been expected all this time. At that same moment, in another room, the temple's representatives and the Holy Father were sitting around a large table. Suddenly, the door creaked, and everyone turned their attention toward it. Saint Maria entered, bowed to those present, and apologized for being late. Bachman immediately said there was no need to apologize since they had only just gathered. Then the old man motioned for the woman to take her seat. Once she did, and everyone was present, the Holy Father declared that it was time to begin. Thus, he opened their meeting concerning the saint. The discussion began with the recent incidents of priests being found unconscious. What was even stranger was that all of them had lost their memories. Moreover, a dangerous weapon had been found near the locations of these incidents. It turned out that all these events consistently occurred near the saint. The Holy Father recounted all of this and concluded that, therefore, he believed the saint's security should be strengthened. But suddenly, one of the men at the table slammed his fist and protested the proposal. He admitted that the attackers could indeed be assassins, but wondered how they were supposed to afford additional guards. The Holy Father acknowledged Brother Omar's opinion. Then he turned to Sister Maria and asked what she thought. She replied that just to be safe, it truly wouldn't hurt to increase the level of protection. After all, she pointed out, right now only George was protecting the saint. And that was no easy task. Therefore, it made no sense to save money when it came to her safety. At that moment, Omar interjected again, shouting in frustration that they simply didn't have the money for it. He clarified that he wasn't against improving security. He simply stated they couldn't do it because there were no funds available. Others began whispering among themselves. One asked if the church was really short on money. Another replied that he had indeed heard that donations had decreased. Still, he never would have imagined that they were so broke they couldn't even afford security. Hearing this, Archbishop Omar almost tore out the few hairs he had left. The priests, after all, weren't very skilled in financial matters. Some thought that money just appeared and disappeared on its own, while others spent everything the moment it came in. As a result, Omar alone was responsible for all the church's finances. Furious, the man shouted that they shouldn't even mention the topic again until they had gathered enough funds. Maria listened carefully to everything that was said, then spoke up. She announced that if money was the only issue, she had an idea. Meanwhile, Crome was sitting in his office, dreaming a strange dream. Before him stood a queen who called him her little Crome. She said she wanted to tell him something only he could know, that even after her death, she would always remember her past life. That's why, even after death, when she was reborn, she would definitely return to Runabout. Then she handed the young man a small vial filled with some kind of red liquid. She said that in a few decades, they would surely meet again. So, even if she were to die without ever obtaining the forbidden magic, she wanted him to protect Runabout. Suddenly, the man woke up. He had heard someone calling him Lord Crome. He quickly said he had just been lost in thought and asked his subordinate what he had been saying. The man replied that, in order to strengthen security, the Holy Temple had decided to open a selection tournament. Crome then took the flyer containing all the information. He saw that the selected participants would enter for free, while all others had to pay an entry fee. He realized that instead of paying for labor, the temple was actually charging people to work for them. His subordinate added that other temples were also strengthening their security due to the rising number of attacks. Chrome then asked if there was any news from the last messenger of death. He was told that the man had completely lost his memory and had begun serving those very priests. Chrome pondered that he didn't believe such clueless priests could pull this off. Then he stated that this must surely be the work of the saint. Suddenly, Jack appeared behind Chrome and asked if they were talking about the saint. The older man wondered aloud if Jack had been eavesdropping again using his spirit powers. But Jack quickly pointed out that he had clearly heard them mention the saint's name. Then, as usual, with a smirk, he added that if they were talking about the selection tournament, they'd end up thanking him later if they didn't send him there. Chrome immediately replied that this wouldn't happen. Jack asked what he meant by that, and Chrome explained that it was because he himself would be the one going. Jack paused, wondering what had suddenly come over him. Then he said that, unlike him, he could hide his mana using the power of spirits. But Chrome, whose mana was practically written on his forehead, would be discovered in no time. Chrome's subordinate reminded him that he was already known as the Messenger of Runabout. Therefore, the moment he appeared, everyone would recognize him. Jack then asked if Chrome left, who would rule Runabout in his absence. Chrome replied that, as for governance, he had one solution. At that moment, he removed a ring from his index finger and handed it to Beatrice. The girl smiled and said she had been wondering why he had called her here. She added that they had lived their lives as they pleased, and she had never expected him to entrust her with his responsibilities. She went on to say she would show him just how remarkable a leader she could be. At that time, Beatrice still remained the Mage of Envy. Jack exclaimed, "Could it really be Beatrice?" She turned to the older man and told him not to come back anytime soon since everything would be fine while she was in charge. Chrome replied that he would test her first, and only then entrust everything to her. But suddenly, Jack asked Chrome to wait and hear him out. Chrome ignored him and immediately attacked using his power. Luckily, Jack managed to dodge in time. Chrome continued speaking. He told Jack that because of that foolish reason, saving the saint, she had remained alive for about 5 years. Because of this, the decaying temple had risen again. The suspicions of his betrayal were now beyond any doubt, and it was no surprise. Moreover, since he had once been obsessed with Lucifella and had now fixated on the saint, Chrome was becoming convinced that the saint truly was Lucifella's reincarnation, or something very similar. Because of all this, Chrome decided he must personally investigate everything and confirm whether the saint was truly worthy of the altar. Meanwhile, Maria was sitting with the heroine and told her that they were preparing to make an announcement about her. The girl, surprised, asked if they really intended to make such a public declaration. Maria replied that it was true. Since they planned to strengthen security, they wanted to officially announce her existence. That's why, for her sake, the strongest and most worthy people from all over the continent would gather. The girl protested, saying she didn't want any of that. Then she pointed at George IV and said that having only him was more than enough. At that, the young man looked away awkwardly and said that she was the one who always complained about him, always saying she didn't need such an annoying bodyguard. So as much as it saddened him, perhaps it was time to part ways. The girl, now angry, told him that of course she didn't want him following her around all the time, but she never said she wanted a replacement for him. Maria gently wiped the girl's face and said that all of this was being done so she could grow up peacefully and without worry. She asked the heroine to understand, because for them, this was the right thing to do. At that moment, the heroine thought that she still hadn't found the forbidden magic. She couldn't imagine how much longer it would take now that she was assigned a new guard. She wondered if there was another way to stop the tournament if she couldn't halt it directly. Then she walked up to her protector, George IV, and asked him not to leave. With a pitiful expression, she said that she liked him, and that's why she teased him so often. That's also why she said he shouldn't follow her, because in truth, she really needed him. The boy blushed deeply and then even began to cry. Falling to his knees, he thought about how the saint had always scolded him, but he had never imagined she actually felt that way about him. Then the girl told him that's exactly why he should participate in that tournament as well. The boy looked up, startled, and asked what she was talking about. Sometime later, the tournament truly began. Paladin George III stood on the stage and declared that they sincerely congratulated everyone who had passed the preliminary trials. He said that standing there meant they were worthy to become personal guards of the saint. Then, with excitement, he asked if they should start the tournament right away. The crowd erupted with cheers. Among the large crowd of candidates stood the heroine's personal guard, George IV. Watching everything, he felt rather sad as he recalled his conversation with the girl. Back then, he had asked if she really meant that he needed to participate in the tournament. The heroine had told him to show all his strength, for her sake. She also asked him to defeat every one of his opponents and emerge victorious. The boy hesitated, wanting to say something, but the girl interrupted him. She grabbed his hand and said that she had already chosen him as her protector. George listened to her more intently now. The girl added that it wasn't only about his strength. She knew better than anyone how hard he had worked while staying by her side. Then the heroine asked him to make everyone understand that he, and only he, would be her personal bodyguard. The boy blushed and couldn't bring himself to answer. Now standing among the candidates, he thought about how he had received a command directly from the saint. To make sure no one even dared to think ill of her, he had to become the best. At that moment, he overheard people whispering about him. Two men were talking. One told the other to look at that little kid among the adults. The second asked if that was the boy who made it onto the list of contestants without even passing the trials. The first replied that he was a paladin's son who got in through connections. The second man said he doubted the kid had any chance of winning. But the first noted that if they were talking about the trials, there was only one person who ever passed them on the first try. The other man replied that he had heard of only one such person, and if he remembered correctly, that man's name was Chrome. At that moment, a man with dark energy passed by them very closely. The two immediately froze in fear and looked at him. Chrome gave them a cold, hateful stare and told them to step aside and let him through. At that same time, the heroine was sitting in her room while the maids brushed her hair. The girl sat quietly, staring at a large sheet of paper. She wondered why she even needed to look at it. Omer was also in the room and said that it was the financial report, an accounting of the money earned from the tournament. Maria was there too and remarked that even if Omer showed it to her, the saint would hardly be able to understand anything. However, after going through the report for a while, the heroine suddenly said in surprise that as many as 9,000 people had come. That was so many. The man was overjoyed and exclaimed that with that amount of money, they could finally restore the ruined temple. Then he added that this wasn't even all. Portraits of the saint were selling like hotcakes. The girl frowned and said that they were basically selling her face, and she wondered how many copies had been sold already. Omer replied that on average, each person bought about 10 copies. On top of that, they had even received an order from the Northern Kingdom for 10,000 more. Hearing such enormous numbers, the heroine was stunned and thought, could there really be that many? She then remembered how shocked she'd been when the guards were first hired without any pay, but she never expected that they'd build such a profitable business using her name and face. After that, the heroine began to study the report more carefully. Then she said that both Maria, who came up with the tournament idea, and Omer, who organized everything, were actually quite talented. Hearing those words, the man was deeply touched and visibly moved. The girl immediately added that she trusted him completely, so he had to make sure that the money wouldn't end up in the wrong hands. Fired up by her words, Omer declared that he would do everything to ensure that. The girl looked at him with a skeptical expression. She also thought that maybe she should go right now and take a look at the competition herself. At the tournament grounds, the fights for the position of the saint's bodyguard were still raging on. The candidates kept competing in various trials, showing off their strength before the masters. It was around that time that the heroine quietly sneaked over to the place and peeked out from behind some crates. The girl soon realized that among the participants were also the disasters of Runabout, meaning there was a good chance that one of them might end up becoming her guard. More genres are coming soon. Subscribe to unlock them all.